Welcome to Message in a Bottle Church with Pastor Rob. Here you can find the true answers to your questions about every area of your life. Answers from your Creator, the one who made you. Pastor Rob will lead you into God's will for your life and peace.
And just wondering today how you're doing. I hope everything is well with you, with your family, and with work and your life. I hope everything is going great. And again, always begin with this, but that is what God desires for you. He desires that you be successful, that you have joy and peace and a full life. And He desires that you have a secure contentment, knowing that He is watching out after you, that He's protecting you, and that He's our protector and provider. I'm going to talk a little bit today about examining ourselves. If you want to know how things are going with anything, a vehicle or your job or anything, you have to stop once in a while and just take an assessment. Just examine yourself and see how things are doing. And then you can set goals for the future, or you can be encouraged, or you can be challenged by where you feel you're at. And so today we're just going to examine ourselves a little bit spiritually and take a look at ourselves and see what our priorities are, what we're actually living for, and what kind of fruit that we're bearing, and where we're going. The purpose of life is such an important thing. You know, we get, especially in America, we've talked about this before, we get caught up with so many things. And I understand that in growing a family and developing and keeping a marriage relationship and keeping our job and trying to do well there and glorify the Lord and trying not to get caught up in the world system. It's so difficult, especially in America. Things move so fast, and everything out there in the world is telling you, be the best you can be and do the best you can for the place where you're working and make as much money as you can, get the nicest home that you can. And that's a natural thing that's designed and wired into a man. He wants to please his wife. That's just in us. And he wants to provide the best that he can. And it's very competitive out there. And in order to have a standard of life that's accepted in America or looked up to, you have to pretty much devote yourself to your work. And we get caught up in working 60, 80, 100 hours a week or trying to climb the ladder. And there's a lot of other people trying to climb that same ladder. And so we have to compete. And we're constantly tempted to make the wrong decisions, make decisions that are for us and not for other people. And God, of course, has told us, and He's making us into Christ's image and into His character. And He's told us to consider others more important than ourselves. But like they say, good guys finish last. And I've been in a lot of jobs where if I didn't compromise my morals in Christ or my values, then I would not do as well as a lot of the other guys. It's very difficult to compete. And so a lot of times I didn't do as well. And I know that's going on in all of our lives. And we've got relatives and friends that are maybe living in a little higher standard of living homes and stuff than we are. And that challenges us because we get embarrassed sometimes. But we need to take an examination of ourselves and our values constantly to make sure that we're living according to the truth. And we all know that this life is over really quick, and then we're going to be home in heaven for eternity. And so we want to, Christ told us that. He said, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth eats and rust destroys and thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth doesn't eat, where rust doesn't destroy, and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your heart is, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it's so easy for us to slip into that, even without recognizing it. But you know, God stood by, our Father in heaven stood by and watched them beat his son and torture him to the point where even his family and friends couldn't recognize him. And he was absolutely pure and sinless and innocent. But God stood by and watched them do that to his own son, when he could have rained down fire on him and destroyed him just in an instant. He's all-powerful, omnipotent God, and he could have done that in, like I said, just like an instant. And how many of us could stand by and watch them do that to our children? And our children aren't innocent. We're all sinners. And then he stood by and watched them crucify him, nail him to that tree. And that's the worst torture in history that any civilization has ever done. It's the most inhumane thing. And yet God stood by and let them do that to his son. How can we ever, after God has done that display of his love, how can we ever challenge his love? And how can we ever challenge his love for us? And we've got a debt that is owed to God, a debt that we can never pay, but a debt still that we owe. And we owe God for doing that for us, and we owe Christ for going to Calvary. And we should constantly be living for Christ and in obedience to him and thinking about that, laying up our treasures in heaven. And so we do have that debt, and it's something we need to keep in the back of our minds. We also obey God and try to glorify him because we love him. And our love is so deep, and it just grows deeper as we get to know him, as we get to know his character. So we want to obey him and store up treasures in heaven and work in his field and be constantly doing ministry for his kingdom because we love him so much, because we owe him, and because we love him, and because of the eternal return. We know that this life is short and we're going to be in heaven for eternity. So why would we ever try to store up treasures in this world and build a little kingdom here in this world for ourselves when we know we're going to be in heaven for eternity and everything that we see is passing away? So we need to examine ourselves just about every day, and especially in America, to make sure that we are living for Christ. And I got some verses here that encourage us, where Christ talks to us about that. In Romans 13:7, it says, "Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, and honor to whom honor is owed." So especially as a man, we want to pay our debts. And that debt to Christ is the biggest debt that we have. We want to be constantly paying Christ in a sense, in the way that we are living for him. And again, living as a Christian is so simple that they try to make it so complicated with all the doctrine and theology and all of the books and stuff and self-help books. But it's really very simple. What God requires of us as a Christian is that we worship him, that we fellowship with him, and that we work in his field every day. Just those three things. And if we get those three things done, and we don't knock off as much as we want to on our chore list, we still have won. Those are the things that we need to be involved in. In Psalm 37:21 it says, "The wicked borrow and does not pay back, but the righteous is gracious and gives." And so again, that's an encouragement for us. Matthew 6:24, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." You know, we think that we can. And we always think, when it comes to wisdom, that from others, we always think, well, that worked out that way for them, but it's going to be different for me because I am different, and I think I can do this. But God is telling us in no uncertain terms that we think that we can live on the fence. Why can't a guy be a Christian and make good money, be successful in the world, have a good career, and have a beautiful home and a nice car and those types of things. Those things just demand our time, and that takes time from what we should be doing for Christ. It just does. We can fool ourselves and say that it doesn't, but we can't build that little kingdom for ourselves just the way we want to live in this world successfully, and at the same time build Christ's kingdom. And God is telling us that we can't do that. And I know in the Christian community we struggle with that and we try to rationalize it, but that's God telling us the truth right there. If we want to, whatever, we have to decide what we're going to do. And God doesn't twist his arm. He's a gentleman. I hate to use that term, it's a human term, but God is a gentleman. He doesn't twist our arms. He sets out a banquet table in front of us. He says, if you obey me, if you work and live for my kingdom until I come to take you home, which is again a very short period of time, I will bless you. I will reward you. And if you live for the world, you're going to get disappointed. Even back in Psalms, which are principles really for life, it tells us that money has wings. It comes and it goes. And I've heard it from a testimony from so many people. And there's another one here in Ecclesiastes 5:5. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. And we receive Christ and all the benefits, and yet we live in the world and try to build our own little kingdom. That's not right. And again, it's a debt that we owe. And we need to be involved as the most important thing in our life, building up Christ's kingdom and living for him. And in Philippians 2:17 it says, but even if I am being poured out like a drink offering in the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice about you. Paul, take a look at Paul's life. Paul at one point said, if you want to live for Christ and if you want to please him, live like I do. That's kind of a paraphrase, but that's what Paul said. And he was so devoted in his life and so sure because he didn't have any other object that he was going after. It was just purely for Christ and ministry. And he had that clear conscience. And he's a model for us. The time is short. The clock is ticking. We don't know how much time we have left. We know that Christ is coming soon, and especially the way things look right now, it looks like it's going to be any day. And so just logically and obediently and repaying that debt that we owe to God, we should be living absolutely for Christ. And I am greedy myself, I admit it, and I want to store up as much treasure in heaven as I can. Because that's going to affect my eternity, and because I love God and owe a debt to him. And so just for all of us, let's take a look at our lives and examine ourselves and make sure that with this short period of time that we've got left, that we're living full out for Christ. And if you will join with me as a kindred spirit in living full out for Christ in the time we've got left, we can pray for each other and hold each other up. That's the challenge that I have for you today. I love you. I want all the best things for you, and God wants them more. Remember, he's a rewarder of those who do good. That's just his nature. And he disciplines those who don't. And it's kind of fuzzy. We don't know for sure how it's going to work out. But if God rewards those who do good and live for him, that means that there must be some type of negative thing for those who don't, because they won't receive that reward. I don't know what that is, but I sure don't want to find out. I'll have a video out for you next week. Have a blessed week and live full on for Christ. If I don't see you before, I'll see you in heaven.